Hello world, today we're going to take a brief look at Flex and Grid, more particularly when to use which. Let's start by looking at some layouts that you can achieve with Flex. A glance over the terminology, this is a Flex parent with the display of Flex obviously, all of whose children will be called the Flex items. Flex containers and Flex items will have special Flex props which give us a nice way of controlling the layout. We can justify the content to center or to the end or even spaced out like this. By default, items are laid out row-wise, and they only take as much space as they need to be fully visible. We can also change the row flow to a column flow and do similar things. You see, we could change the flow from row to column, but we cannot have both in a flexbox. That's where it could be limiting, managing two-dimensional layouts. Let's take this layout for instance, where we have three items laid out in this fashion. If we consider this main container, we have two rows flowing in this direction, but in the top row, we have two columns flowing in this direction. And in order to achieve this, we'd need two Flex containers where one flows row-wise and the other column-wise, which can result in a nested mess for a little more complicated 2D layout. Here's where Grid shines. It allows us to define rows and columns together. We can say that we want two rows and two columns. And then when you lay the items down, they're placed row-wise like so, where the children will be called grid items. And then we can pick a grid item and say that it should span two columns. Let's jump into the code ground and see how different the two versions look for this layout. I'll start by creating a div with a class of Flex container inside which I'll add three boxes, each with an additional class representing their color. For the initial setup, I'll give all these boxes a padding so that they're visible in spite of having no content, and assign a background for the color classes. A side note, the reason why these boxes aren't taking full width is because I have constrained the content to be in the center. When I give a display of Flex to the Flex container, we see that they all come beside each other. But for our main container, we want them to flow in the vertical direction, so I'll set the Flex direction prop to column. Now, in order to be able to change the flow for only the first two boxes, I'll put them inside a wrapper, then set the display of that wrapper to Flex, which by default will lay the items row-wise. I'll give the container a width of 360 pixels to make it look similar to the layout we had in the slides. But now you see that the boxes occupy only as much space as they need, leaving the space empty to the right. There is a way we can tell the Flex items to grow as much as they can with the Flex Grow prop. I'll set it to 1 to finally get the layout we wanted. And that's how we could create this layout in Flex. Let's pedal back and restore our HTML to start writing the same layout with Grid. Back to CSS, we'll select the Grid container and set its display to Grid. To say that we need two columns and two rows, we'll use the grid template rows and grid template columns props. Now you see that the elements are laid out row-wise. Next, we want to tell the screen box to occupy two columns, and that can be done by setting its grid column to span 2. I won't get into too much detail about the props, just demonstrating what we can do with grid here. For the last section, we'll look at how easy it is to change the order of elements without having to redo the markup. Income grid template areas. This allows us to name the areas created by the intersection of rows and columns. Each string represents a row, and space separator values will become the names of the cells. In this one, we're saying that we'll call the cell at the top left as yellow box, top right as red box, and bottom left and right both as green box. Now, we can select each grid item and give them grid area prop to govern the area they belong to. Once that's done, I can change the grid template areas to place the items at different parts of the grid super easily without having to change the order in the markup. And that's all for this one. Thanks for watching.